Good morning, everyone. This is John with Gun.Deals. Today we're talking about the top tier Turkish trap gun, the Canik Rival S. The S standing for sad for the fall of Constantinople. But it also stands for steel. This is the heavyweight in the Canik lineup, coming in at 42 ounce, unloaded, and no optics. Now, full disclosure, I found this at a local store and paid my own money for it. I have no affiliation with Canik or Century Arms importers. Briefly talking about value of the Rival S, this is the most expensive option in their lineup with a 9 bill MSRP and a street of around 8, which for a steel framed option isn't that bad, and that's sort of Canik's whole brand, similar features and performance for a little lower cost. Now, getting into the basics of the Rival S, if you aren't familiar with the Canik lineup, you have the older TP9s of various sizes and models. You have the standard SFX Rival, which is sort of the top tier, fully featured competition styled option in a polymer frame, and then the Rival S, which is of course the same thing, just with a steel frame and about 15 extra ounces. Newer options include the Metas and MZ9s, but as of yet they haven't come out with a new version of the steel framed Rival, so this is still the top dog. Now, the Rival S comes in two different models, the chromed version, which is a little too gaudy for me, even though there's nothing subdued about either version, and the model you see here, which is called the Darkside, which is at least a cool name, so thanks for not calling it something completely ridiculous. Starting out with the grip, it is of course steel with checkering up front, which is just aggressive enough to do its job. The rest of the grip texture is just a plastic module that bolts onto the frame, and the box comes with 3 different sizes. I experimented with all 3, but ended up just using the biggest one, even though I have smallish hands. The grip itself is good. The panel that I use the most is now full of dead skin and needs to be cleaned up, so it does do its job. The problem, as you probably expect with the rest of the frame, is that it's just this super slick metal finish, so the grip that it has is good, but I would like a lot more of it. Now, I should mention that I'm currently not using any of the plastic grip panels, as a kind viewer of the channel gave me a deal on his brass lock grip set, which is much grippier and adds another 8 ounces to the overall weight. Now, moving on to the mag, well, it's pretty well beveled and flared, but I do have one problem. At the back of the frame here, you can see that they leave a lot of material in there, which basically every fumbled reload I have is right on that sharp edge there, so if they had just removed most of that, it would be a little bit better. But of course, Dremel go burr. Now, if you don't want to do that, it does ship with a mag funnel that you can take on and off, and that mostly resolves that issue, but I can't use that in USPSA carry optics, so I used it for a little while, but most of my shooting I have to leave it off for competition reasons. Speaking of the magazines for a second, it does ship with 2 18-round magazines, which is really lame. It needs to ship with 3 20s in my opinion. Fortunately, magazines are only $30 or so it's not as bad as some models out there, but again, it's the top tier competition handgun. Please just ship it with more better magazines. Now, moving on to controls, it does have 3 different length magazine releases that are pretty easy to install, anything from small, which I'm currently using now, to a super tall for those of you who simply don't want to move your grip at all during reloads. Everything else is pretty standard for the Canik line, ambi slide stop and release levers that my small hands can reach well enough, a simple takedown lever, and 2 memory pads for your support hand thumb, and up front we have an accessory rail for lights or whatever else you guys put up there. Now, talking about the trigger, that's what everybody wants to talk about when it comes to Caniks, and it's good. The Rival S has an aluminum shoe, a 90-degree brake, and a total pull weight of about 3.5 to 4 pounds. Combine that with a short, crisp reset, and for a striker-fired gun with a stock trigger, it's about as good as you can get. The Walther's performance trigger is probably a little better, and I'm sure there are other aftermarket options out there that have a better quote-unquote trigger, but it's just chasing pixie dust at that point. So really, if you can't nail doubles or bill drills with the Rival S, it's much more likely that you're trying to buy performance rather than actually put in the work to have those skills. Moving up to the side, we have cutouts, serrations, tapers, and sharp edges everywhere. It is on the rougher side of things, so if you have soft, dainty hands, I would look elsewhere. But on the 5-inch slide, total weight comes in at 14 ounces for just the reciprocating mass, that is just the slide and optic, versus as it's configured currently with the brass grips, a total weight of 53 ounces. Keep in mind that the weight limit for carry optics is 59.9, so I'm getting pretty close. Now, talking about the iron sights, for approximately 5 seconds, you have a high-vis front and a fully adjustable blacked-out rear, but I never use them. The downside of the optics plate system on the Rival is that the rear sight is part of the optics plate. The Darkside does come with 5 different optics plates for just about anything you could possibly want to mount, except for the acro. Now, the plates are aluminum and they thread down onto the slide. I don't love the system because the slide is cut for the very small screws. You do get a lot of contact between the slide and the plate as they slot down into each other nicely, and the screws do get a lot of threads in there because of how deep the cut goes, but they are the smaller screws, so you should really only use about 12 to 15 inch-pounds of torque, and I had them come loose twice. Once with no Loctite, that's my fault. Once with blue Loctite, and they came loose in a couple hundred rounds, and then it's been fine for the last 1500 or so with red Loctite and 15 inch-pounds. Something else that people might not like is how high the optic sits, as the plates are very thick and the optic basically sits on top of the slide, but again, the advantage is there that your screws can be longer and get lots of grip versus like a Glock slide. Now keep in mind that I bought this specifically as a USPSA carry optics cheat code, so not having irons isn't a big deal to me, and I just get used to the taller optic height. Now, talking about the recoil system, I think as most Caniks are, it is a little oversprung. If it's 17 pounds, then it could probably go down to 15 or 14 for a smoother recoil impulse, but as of right now, I'm gonna leave it as it is. The barrel is, of course, the 5-inch barrel, which is what I personally prefer. If you're shooting poppers or plate racks, the 5-inch hits with a little more authority, and I've seen other competitors have to take a makeup shot, which I usually don't have that issue. Now, for some reason, the barrel is fluted barely everywhere with these really shallow flutes. They don't do anything other than look cool, I guess. Personally, I would have rather of them just left all of the material on the barrel, as it's already a heavy gun, so weight reduction doesn't matter, but I suppose it's just an aesthetic sort of thing. Now let's briefly talk about accuracy. Most of what I shoot is either 124 grain Blazer Brass or 115 grain Federal, just generic ball ammo. I watch way too many people get screwed over by reloads in the middle of the stage. No thanks, not for me. Functionally, 100 yards is no issue on C-zone size steels. Mechanically, I put 5 rounds into about an inch at 15 yards with just the Federal 115s, with a standard deviation of about 12 FPS. So I think that's good enough accuracy, and for everything else, it seems to be good to go. So now let's talk about how the thing actually shoots. Well, for better or worse, it shoots like a very heavy striker-fired handgun, which is probably not as good as you think it is. Again, while it might be a little bit oversprung, it's not the flattest gun out there, and what I will say that the weight does slow everything down a little bit, so it's not as snappy as a polymer-framed gun, but it still requires all of the same fundamentals to be executed at a high level to get the performance you want out of it. Now, what I will say with all that extra weight and the good trigger is that it does settle better, so for one-handed shooting or for shooting at a extreme distance, I feel like it covers up some of my inefficiencies when it comes to trigger pull, because again, that extra weight takes a little bit more mechanical input to get it to move. Shooting it side by side with a 24-ounce Glock 17, while the Glock is very snappy in comparison and it feels different in hand, with the proper grip, the dot return is very good on a Glock. So really, it's not about better or worse, it's about preference. Some people like the slower, softer heavyweights, and some people actually prefer the faster, snappy lightweight guns. Now, personally, I do feel I have a little bit of an advantage with the super heavy, stable, slower Rival S versus like a Glock 17 or 47, name your favorite polymer framed handgun. I feel like I have a little bit of an advantage, which is kind of funny because a lot of people, myself included, usually attempt to acquire skills through purchasing gear rather than actually putting in work to actually just enhance your skill set. I should touch on reliability. It had one failure to feed on the very first round on a brand new 18-round magazine. It did not go all the way into battery, but after that, it's been perfect for about 2,000 rounds. Now, overall, I do like the thing. I think it is a good shooter. I think the performance is relatively good. The value is pretty good for a steel framed handgun, not for handguns in general, but for this specific feature set. I don't think you can get another steel framed handgun for 800 bucks that fits into the carry optics role. There might be some really cheap 1911 or 2011s floating around out there, but then that bumps you up into a different division. I've already won some matches with the Rival S, and I do enjoy shooting it quite a bit, so I'm going to be putting in a lot of time and energy training with it, getting better with it, and in fact, this weekend, I have a full classifier match in USPSA. This year alone, I plan to shoot about 15 to 20,000 rounds, if it can keep up with that, so we'll see how it holds up long term. But with all that out of the way, gentlemen, thank you so much for watching. I hope you all enjoyed. Let me know what you think of the Canik Rival S in the comments down below, and with all that out of the way, gentlemen, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. I will see you in the next one. Peace off.